People may think of this before in terms of familiarity with China's Great Firewall. Great Firewall was designed to keep information out of China. The cybersecurity law has that function, but it goes beyond that to keep controls, tight controls over information within China in terms of information security, but also to prevent information from going out of China unless it's already been approved and under tight security controls. It's a one-party system and so forth, but it's a system that increasingly relies upon law. Law provides a degree of stability. It provides a degree of uniformity across the country. So we've seen a national security law enacted and come into effect in 2015. The cybersecurity law was enacted last year and it comes into effect on June 1st of this year. We now have a draft intelligence law. So there are a whole series of laws in this regard. In terms of the cybersecurity law, it actually goes beyond the national security law in an important respect. The cybersecurity law seeks to protect what they call personal information and important information. Now, the concept of important information is, not surprisingly, not terribly well defined. Indeed, personal information historically in China has not been as well protected in terms of privacy as would be the case in many other jurisdictions. But that is increasing. But goes beyond that in terms of identifying who is responsible for this task of protecting such information. The national security law, which came first, referred to the role of the critical infrastructure information and those who were responsible for maintaining such networks. The cybersecurity law goes beyond that and applies to all network operators. And that means, of course, that if you are engaging in any communication internally within your operations in China, you are essentially a network. And so to the extent that personal information of your employees, your customers, etc., enters into it, then you have an obligation with respect to the cross-border data flow. If you have, for example, your central offices in Toronto, Montreal, or wherever else, and you want to move such information on your employees, your customers, and so forth, you want to analyze that data, you want to control how things are done here by your subsidiary or your agent or whoever here in Canada, then that cross-border data flow is going to be subject to regulation. If one is a company, you have to really look at the regulations overall and determine whether you can comply with them and at what cost. The cybersecurity law has the potential to affect all industries. All industries in the sense that if they of course have content, they have information. They have information on customers, they have information on their employees. To some extent, they gather information for their own customers. Part of the cybersecurity law is, again, the restriction of information to go outside the country. So regardless of which industry you are in, the pending regulations on cross-border data flows will have an effect upon you. China has historically not had extensive privacy protections, but those are increasing. But the cybersecurity law goes beyond the privacy protections, which are legitimate, and it goes beyond the protection of cyber from unwanted intrusions, whether in terms of espionage or in terms of criminal activity, to tightly regulate the content. So that's the biggest category in terms of the breadth of companies that are affected. But if you're a company that's involved in a regulated industry like finance, insurance, banking, etc., where there are particular and additional regulations associated with the regulations with cybersecurity, then you may be restricted in terms of the hardware and the software that you can procure, that you can operate your business by. One of the big issues here in terms of cross-border data flow is that foreign companies cannot wholly own a data center here in China. So one of the things to do is to consider essentially using who your contractor is if you're talking about cloud services and so forth. So essentially rely upon somebody else, outsource that service, and trust that that company, which has already been approved here in China, It's one of the things you want to be sure that whoever you're talking to has been approved to provide the relevant service so that they essentially do that work for you. Many companies are already taking steps to prepare. They are already trying to minimize, and if you're taking a big company, trying to minimize the data flow. Also trying to anonymize the data flow so you can assure the government that you're protecting personal privacy. And also contracting with one of the various international data centers, internet data centers that's been established that is in compliance with the regulations in order to assure yourself that essentially some of the obligation as well as the cost is transferred to this third party. It's going to be hard. If you're large enough, you can put most of the data responsibility within your operations here in China. That is, when I say large enough, and you've got substantial operations in China, and so not everything has to be moved offshore. But let's assume that's not the case. And in fact, your operations in China are relatively small. The main thing you have to do is ensure, firstly, in terms of personal information, that you have the necessary consents to the transmission of data from the individuals. Now, one of the questions here is, in terms of consent, what does that mean? Does it mean consent for every time you ask for information? The answer to that seems to be no. That's not the intention. But in what form is a consent obtained? Can the consent be in terms of a contractual consent? That is, I have a customer, and let's assume I'm an insurance company. I have a customer here, and part of the policy says that by subscribing to this policy, I not only agree to provide factual information, I not only agree to be truthful, I not only agree to pay the premiums as necessary, but I also provide consent to have my personal information shared from my doctor to the insurer. And adding on to that I allow also for the local subsidiary of the company to share that information with the headquarters of the company. Subject, of course, to the protections that apply here. So again, there's going to be a full protection for your personal privacy in accordance with Chinese law. So I think that's a particularly serious issue that companies may have to face, is the extent to which they will be able to transmit data overseas. Again, anonymization will help. That's a way to address the personal side of things. But if we are talking about what's called important information, we don't necessarily know, again, how much is embraced in important information. For example, suppose one is a trader in commodities. A lot of information about trading in commodities is restricted here in China as a national secret. Can one transmit it across border, even if one has the information onshore? If one doesn't have a physical presence, and instead one does business in China remotely, if the individual, let's assume you're in e-commerce, and people just buy your products and services, well, that's okay. They've already consented by the purchase order itself. They've already consented to transmit a portion of their personal information to you. There's no question about breach of personal privacy. They've already done that. They've taken the risk upon themselves. But what if you're talking about a customer, which is a company, and the company is involved in something that could be construed as important information? They are relying upon you, and you can be a small company as well as a much larger company in this respect, to, for example, to monitor the performance of their systems. This becomes a major question because the information which they transmit to you may constitute important information and therefore shouldn't really be transmitted across borders. This applies, for example, with respect to medical devices or aviation engines, where a company that manufactures the product, or indeed it may be a specialized service provider, monitors the performance of this critical equipment on a real-time basis, 24 hours a day, every second essentially, in order to determine whether the product is performing well, because lives may depend upon it. Or alternatively, The functioning of critical equipment may in turn depend upon it. Well, that's going to be very, very difficult to do without relocating that capability to China. If one's business essentially is in cyberspace, you should be able to operate anywhere in the world. But these regulations, if they carried forward without significant amendment, will make it very difficult to do so from outside China.